The screaming starts at 0200 hours. Not the screaming they told Lieutenant Hans Weber to expect. Not the ordered advance of British regulars, trumpet calls and parade ground discipline. Something else entirely. Something animal. Weber presses himself against the limestone trench wall outside Tobruk, April 21st, 1941, and tries to understand what he is hearing. His hands shake. Not from fear, he tells himself, but from the cold desert night. 23 years old, 6 weeks in North Africa, and everything the instructors at Bad Tolls promise about colonial troops shatters with each new sound from the darkness. A grenade detonates 40 meters to his left. Then another. Then silence, worse than the explosions. In that silence, Weber hears footsteps. Not marching. Running. Men moving fast through positions that should be empty, that his company secured just 3 hours ago. They are supposed to defend. Weber whispers to Obergefreite to climb beside him. The British defend. They hold ground and wait for relief. Klein does not answer. Klein is staring at something in the darkness, his Mauser raised but not firing, as if shooting might draw attention to where they hide. The intelligence briefing said the Australians would crack within days. Soft colonials, the report claimed, used to sunshine and sheep farming. No stomach for real war. That was 6 days ago. Weber has not slept in 4 to 7 hours. If this story moves you, please hit that like button and subscribe. The veterans who lived these moments deserve to have their experiences remembered, all of them, from every side. Hans Weber came to North Africa believing in German superiority with the conviction of a man who had never questioned anything. Berlin, 1937. He watched the rallies, absorbed the certainty, enlisted at 18. 2 years of training. Poland, 3 weeks. France, 6 weeks. Each victory confirming what the newsreels promised. The Reich's armies were unstoppable, their enemies soft and decadent. The briefing for North Africa reinforced everything he knew. The Afrika Korps would sweep through Libya, Egypt, beyond. British forces, already beaten in Europe, would collapse. Their colonial auxiliaries, Australians, New Zealanders, Indians, South Africans, would break first. Men from periphery of empire, lacking the steel of proper soldiers. Tobruk would fall in days. Then Benghazi, then Cairo. Weber believed this completely. His unit, the 15th Panzer Division, arrived in Tripoli in February 1941. The heat shocked him first, how anything this hot could exist on Earth. Then the flies, then the distances, the emptiness, the way the desert made every landmark disappear. But the mission seemed simple enough. Push east, break the British line, capture the port at Tobruk. The Australian 9th Division occupied Tobruk. 22,000 men, primarily Australian, some British units, behind fortifications the Italians built and then abandoned. The intelligence assessment described them as adequate defensive troops, nothing more. Fresh from training in Palestine, no combat experience against German forces, led by officers who earned their ranks in peacetime garrison duty. They will surrender or retreat, the briefing officer said, spreading maps across the table in the command tent. The British always retreat. It is their nature. Weber copied this into his journal that night. He wanted to remember it later when they told the story of how Tobruk fell. By April 10th, Rommel's forces surrounded the port. The siege began. Weber expected it to end quickly. The first night raid comes on April 13th. Weber's company hold a position 3 kilometers south of Tobruk's perimeter, a listening post meant to monitor Australian movements and report any breakout attempts. Standard siege positioning. They dig in at dusk, establish watch rotations, settle in for a quiet night of observation. At 2300 hours, the world explodes. Not artillery, something closer. Grenades, dozens of them, hurled from darkness Weber cannot penetrate. Then rifle fire, precise and devastating, picking off anyone who raises a head above the trench line. Then, worse than any of it, men appearing in the trenches themselves, moving fast with bayonets fixed, shooting at point-blank range. Australians. Weber fires blind into the darkness, hearing his own voice screaming orders that no one follows because no one can hear anything over the chaos. The attack lasts 11 minutes. Then silence again, as suddenly as it started. When morning comes, Weber counts casualties. 9 dead, 14 wounded. 2 machine gun positions destroyed. 5 men missing, captured or fled. Weber does not know which and cannot bring himself to investigate. The Australians leave behind nothing except boot prints and blood. They are not supposed to attack, Klein says, bandaging a gash across his forearm. Defenders do not attack. This is not how siege warfare works. But they do attack, the next night, and the next, and the next. The pattern becomes horrifyingly clear. The Australians do not wait for relief. They do not conserve strength behind their fortifications. Instead, every night, small teams, sometimes 5 men, sometimes 50, slip through perimeter and assault German positions. They target command posts, supply depots, artillery emplacements. They move silently until the moment of attack, then strike with overwhelming violence, then vanish before reinforcements arrive. Weber's unit receives orders to strengthen defensive positions. They add barbed wire, dig deeper trenches, post extra sentries. It makes no difference. The Australians find gaps, exploit weaknesses, strike where defenses are thinnest. The intelligence reports change. Colonial auxiliaries become determined opponents. Adequate defensive troops becomes highly aggressive enemy force. Will surrender or retreat become siege may take longer than anticipated. Weber notices his hands develop a tremor that will not stop. He notices Klein stops talking except to give necessary reports. He notices the newest replacements, fresh from Germany, lose their eagerness within 3 days. On April 22nd, Rommel himself visits forward positions. Weber stands in the inspection line, watching the Desert Fox move down the ranks, offering words of encouragement. When Rommel reaches Weber, he pauses. "You have been here since the beginning?" Rommel asks. "Yes, Head General." "The Australians, what can you tell me about them?" Weber searches for words that will not sound like complaint, like weakness, like excuse. "They fight at night, Herr General. They do not fight like the British." Rommel nods slowly, as if Weber has confirmed something he already suspected. "No," Rommel says quietly, "they do not." That afternoon, Weber overhears 2 staff officers discussing casualty figures. German losses around Tobruk: 463 killed, 1,800 wounded. Australian losses inside Tobruk, estimated at half that number, despite being outnumbered and surrounded. "It makes no sense," one officer says. "We have them trapped. We have superior forces, air support, armor. They should be dying faster than us." The other officer says nothing. Weber understands why. There is no answer that fits the reality they are experiencing. The night raids continue. By May, Weber's unit has been rotated off the front line twice for rest, but rest means nothing when sleep is impossible. Every sound in darkness becomes Australian footsteps. Every shadow becomes an enemy infiltrator. On May 15, Weber sees his first prisoner, an Australian captured during a raid that went wrong when German reinforcements arrived faster than expected. The prisoner is 20 years old, farm background, enlisted in Brisbane in 1939. He sits in the interrogation area, bleeding from a shoulder wound, completely calm. "Why do you keep attacking?" the interrogator asks through a translator. "You are surrounded. No relief is coming. Why not conserve your strength and defend your positions?" The Australian looks confused by the question. "We're not going to just sit there and let you shoot at us, are we?" he says. "That'd be stupid." The interrogator tries again. "Your orders are to hold Tobruk. You can hold it by defending. You do not need to attack every night." "Our orders are to hold Tobruk," the Australian agrees. "So we're holding it. We're not letting you get comfortable out there. Every night you spend worrying about us is a night you're not planning your next push." He pauses, wincing at his shoulder. Seems straightforward enough. Weber realizes something then. Standing outside the interrogation tent, the Australians are not defending Tobruk. They are hunting Germans who happen to be surrounding Tobruk. The distinction matters enormously. By June, German intelligence compiles detailed reports on Australian night fighting tactics. The reports describe systematic aggression, careful reconnaissance, coordinated small unit actions, and most troubling, apparent enjoyment of close combat. German soldiers interviewed after raids consistently describe Australians as eager for engagement, confident in darkness, willing to take casualties to inflict greater casualties. One report quotes an Oberst assessment. These are not soldiers defending their homeland under duress. These are professional warriors who have chosen this fight and approach it with enthusiasm we have not encountered elsewhere. Weber reads this report in late June and thinks about the young prisoner's confusion, his genuine inability to understand why anyone would defend passively when attacking was an option. The siege extends through summer. 100 days, 150 days, 200 days. The Australians launch 119 documented night raids between April and August. Some are small harassing actions. Others involve company-strength forces penetrating deep into German positions. Every single raid inflicts disproportionate casualties compared to Australian losses. In July, Weber's company receives a new intelligence briefing. The officer delivering it looks exhausted, defeated before he begins speaking. Effective immediately, he says, all units are to avoid night engagement with Australian forces unless absolutely necessary. Strengthen defensive positions. Increase wire. Triple sentries. If Australians approach your position after dark, fall back to secondary positions and call for artillery support. Someone in the back of the tent laughs, a single bitter sound. The officer does not reprimand him. We are ordering German soldiers to retreat from Australians, a veteran Feldwebel asks. The officer's jaw tightens. We are ordering you to preserve strength for operations where we have tactical advantage. Night fighting against Australians is not such an operation. After the briefing, Klein finds Weber outside the tent. Do you remember what they told us? Klein asks, in training, about the natural superiority of German soldiers. Weber says nothing. There is nothing to say. I fought in Poland. Klein continues. I fought in France. I saw the French army collapse in 6 weeks. Professional soldiers, good equipment, defensive positions. They broke. He lights a cigarette with shaking hands. These Australians have been surrounded for 4 months. Cut off from supply. Bombed every day. They should have broken 3 months ago. Instead, they are breaking us. In August, British forces launch Operation Crusader, an offensive to relieve Tobruk from the outside. The siege finally begins to crack, not because the Australians inside weaken, but because German forces stretched thin across North Africa cannot maintain pressure on multiple fronts. Weber's unit pulls back from Tobruk in November. 241 days of siege. Tobruk does not fall. The withdrawal happens at night, naturally. As they dismantle positions and load equipment, Weber keeps expecting Australian patrols to harass them one final time. They do not come. Perhaps they are letting the Germans leave. Perhaps they are simply too exhausted to mount another raid. Weber does not sleep during the withdrawal. He watches the darkness until sun rises over positions he will never occupy again. The Afrika Korps regroups, resupplies, prepares for renewed offensive operations. For Weber, the war continues. Gazala, Mersa Matruh, El Alamein. At El Alamein, October 1942, the Australian 9th Division holds the northern sector of the Allied line. Rommel knows they are there. Every German commander knows. The presence of Australian units in the sector determines German tactical planning. Where to attack, where to avoid, where to concentrate forces. The battle begins on October 23rd. British forces under Montgomery launch a massive assault along the entire line. The plan is straightforward. Break through German defenses, force Rommel into retreat, change the momentum of the entire North African campaign. The breakthrough comes in the Australian sector. Weber's unit faces Australian forces on October 24th, during the fighting for position marked on German maps as Point 29. Australian infantry supported by British armour assault positions Weber's company has held for 3 weeks. The attack comes at dawn, unusual for Australians, who prefer darkness, but overwhelming in scope and fury. Weber fires until his rifle barrel burns his hands, then fires more. Australians advance through machine gun fire, through artillery, through everything German forces throw at them. When they reach the trenches, the fighting becomes medieval, bayonets and rifle butts and grenades at touching distance. Weber survives because Klein pulls him backward into a communications trench when the line collapses. They retreat 500 meters, regroup with remnants of 3 other companies, establish a new defensive line. It does not matter. The Australians take Point 29. then point 31, then point 33. The German line breaks. On November 4th, Rommel orders full retreat. The Afrika Korps abandons El Alamein, abandoned positions across Egypt, begins a long withdrawal back toward Libya. The decision is military necessity: remain and be destroyed, or retreat and preserve the army for future operations. But Weber understands a real reason, understands what no one will say officially. The Australian breakthrough made the entire position untenable. Once they punched through the northern sector, the entire defensive line became indefensible. The retreat takes weeks. German forces fall back across the same ground they conquered 2 years earlier. Every defensive position Weber's unit establishes, they abandon within days. The Afrika Korps, which swept across North Africa in 1941 with unstoppable momentum, runs from the very forces intelligence dismissed as colonial auxiliaries unworthy of serious attention. During the retreat, Weber's unit intersects with an American battalion near Kasserine Pass, the first American troops Weber has encountered in combat. February 1943. The Americans are fresh, well-equipped, confident. They have not fought Germans before. The engagement lasts 3 days. German forces, despite being exhausted from months of retreat, defeat the American battalion decisively. The Americans break under pressure, abandon positions, suffer heavy casualties. After the battle, Weber sits with Klein in captured American position, eating American rations, surrounded by abandoned American equipment. They were not ready, Klein observes. Weber nods. The Americans fought bravely enough, but without the tactical sophistication or psychological resilience combat demands. They learned the wrong lessons in training, arrived in theater expecting war to match theory, broke when theory proved inadequate. The Australians were never like this, Weber says quietly, even at the beginning, even at Tobruk, before they had experience. They were never soft. Klein opens an American chocolate bar, examines it, takes a bite. Do you think the Americans will learn? Will they become like the Australians? Weber considers this. Perhaps some will, but it will take time. Years, maybe. The Australians were different from the start. I do not think that comes from training. The conversation dies. Around them, other German soldiers loot American supplies, examine American weapons, marvel at the quantity of everything: food, ammunition, equipment. The United States can afford to equip armies lavishly, can afford to lose battles and return with more men and more material. But abundance, Weber thinks, is not the same as quality. The Australians had less of everything at Tobruk: less food, less ammunition, less hope, and fought harder than any force he has encountered. In March 1943, Weber's unit receives a captured intelligence document, an Australian after-action report from Tobruk, dated July 1941. Someone translates it during a quiet evening in bivouac outside Tunis. The report describes a raid Weber remembers. July 16th, Australian patrol of 12 men penetrated German lines, destroyed 2 machine gun nests, killed 7 German soldiers, withdrew without losses. The report is clinical, professional, documenting tactics employed, ammunition expended, enemy casualties inflicted. But one paragraph stands out. Enemy morale appears deteriorating after 96 days of siege operations. German soldiers increasingly reluctant to patrol aggressively or respond to night harassment. Several enemy positions abandoned during approach, before engagement began. Assessment: continued aggressive night operations will further degrade enemy effectiveness and prevent consolidation of siege positions. Weber reads this 3 times. Deteriorating morale, reluctant to patrol, positions abandoned before engagement. They were afraid of us, he realizes. From July onward, maybe earlier, German soldiers around Tobruk feared Australian raiders more than Australians feared German besiegers. The understanding hits like physical blow. The entire siege, every night raid, every dawn counting casualties. The Australians were winning. Not winning ground or winning battles, but winning the psychological war that determines which side keeps fighting and which side breaks. Tobruk never fell because German soldiers stopped believing they could take it. I want to read you something, Weber tells Klein that evening. He retrieves a letter from his pack, written by Rommel in August 1941, a letter Weber copied from a staff officer's papers months ago, knowing someday it would matter. The Australians, Weber reads aloud, represent a quality of soldier we have not faced elsewhere. Their aggression in defense is unprecedented. Each night brings new attacks against our positions, and each attack, regardless of outcome, strengthens our morale while diminishing ours. I have commanded soldiers across Europe, and I tell you plainly, the Australians are the best soldiers in the British Empire, bar none. Klein listens without speaking. When Weber finishes, Klein nods slowly. He was right, Klein says simply. Weber folds the letter carefully, returns it to his pack. We should have retreated from Tobruk in May. We should have admitted we could not break them and redeployed forces elsewhere. Instead, we threw men at positions the Australians would not surrender, sustained casualties we could not afford, lost momentum we never regained. Pride, Klein says. German pride. We could not admit colonial soldiers beat us. Weber thinks about every briefing that dismissed the Australians as inferior, every assessment that predicted their collapse within days, every intelligence report that minimized their effectiveness until minimization became impossible to maintain. The lie was not malicious. Weber believes this. The lie came from genuine conviction that German soldiers represented the pinnacle of military effectiveness, that other armies must inherently be inferior. The briefings reflected this conviction, and the conviction was strong enough that evidence contradicting it took months to overcome. But evidence is stubborn. The Australians at Tobruk broke 241 days of siege operations. The Australians at El Alamein broke the Afrika Korps defensive line. These facts exist independent of any theory about racial superiority or martial culture. What happens after the war? Weber asks, when we tell this story, will anyone believe us? Klein laughs bitterly. They will not want to believe. It is easier to say we're lost because of supplies, because of Allied air superiority, because of American industrial capacity. True enough, all of it. But if you tell someone the Australians were the best soldiers in the desert, he trails off. Who wants to hear that? Better to talk about Montgomery's brilliance or American might or German tactical errors. Weber suspects Klein is right. Already, reports from the front emphasize material factors, enemy equipment, supply shortages, numerical disadvantages. These things matter, certainly, but they do not explain Tobruk. They do not explain why German soldiers developed instinctive fear of Australian night raids. They do not explain Point 29 at El Alamein, when Australian infantry broke positions that should have held. In April, Weber's unit surrenders to British forces in Tunisia. The North African campaign is over. The Afrika Korps, which arrived in triumph in 1941, capitulates in disgrace in 1943. During processing, Weber encounters a British intelligence officer conducting interviews with German prisoners. The officer asks standard questions about unit composition, equipment, morale. Then, the Australians. Your reports consistently single them out. Why? Weber considers how to answer, how to explain something that contradicts everything the British officer has been told about colonial forces, something that defies comfortable narratives about imperial power and colonial dependence. They did not fight like other armies, Weber says finally. Not British. Not American, not even Russian, from what we heard from the Eastern Front. The Australians approached war like. He searches for the right comparison. Like men who chose this fight and intended to win it regardless of cost. The British officer writes this down, but Weber sees skepticism in his expression. The skepticism is understandable. How do you believe that men from Australia, farmers and labourers and clerks from the far edge of empire, fought with ferocity that terrified German veterans of Poland and France? How do you believe it unless you experienced it? Hans Weber survives the war. He returns to Germany in 1947, works in reconstruction, raises a family, lives quietly in a suburb of Munich. He does not talk about North Africa often. When he does, people listen politely but without comprehension. The books about North Africa, and there are many books, many films, many documentaries, focus on different elements. Montgomery's tactical brilliance at El Alamein, Rommel's desert legend, American entry into the theater, British persistence, the Afrika Korps tactical sophistication. All true, all important. The Australians appear as background elements in these narratives. Colonial forces, certainly brave, adequately effective, supporting cast to the main drama of British and German commanders maneuvering across the desert. In 1963, Weber watches a new American film about North Africa. The Australians do not appear. El Alamein is depicted as Montgomery's victory, enabled by American supplies, achieved through British coordination and courage. The breakthrough that forced Rommel's retreat comes from British infantry advancing through minefields. Dramatic, heroic, partially accurate. The Australian 9th Division's role is omitted entirely. Weber turns off the television. He understands why the film was made this way. American audiences want American heroes. British audiences want British heroes. German audiences want to understand how defeat happened. The Australians fit nowhere in these narratives. Too peripheral to matter, except they were not peripheral at all. In 1974, Weber attends a veterans reunion in Stuttgart. Former Afrika Korps soldiers, now elderly, compare memories over beer and cigarettes. Someone mentions Tobruk. The conversation stops. Those night raids, one veteran says quietly. Everyone nods. No explanation needed. The veterans who fought at Tobruk remember the specific terror of Australian night raids with perfect clarity 3 decades later. Younger veterans, men who joined the war later, ask for details. The Tobruk veterans struggle to articulate what made the experience so harrowing. They were supposed to defend. Weber says finally, every tactical manual, every principle of siege warfare, said defenders conserve strength and wait for relief. The Australians attacked. Every night. For 8 months, they attacked. It was not normal. It was not how soldiers behave when surrounded and outnumbered. But it worked, another veteran adds. It absolutely worked. We could not concentrate on planning offensive operations because we spent every night defending against raids. We could not rest our men because rest was impossible. We could not establish secure supply lines because Australians were constantly behind our lines blowing things up. They took a siege situation where they should have been helpless and turned it into active warfare where we were vulnerable. The younger veterans listen with expressions suggesting they do not quite believe what they are hearing. Weber understands. If you did not experience it, if you did not spend 241 days being hunted by men who should have been trapped, the reality sounds like exaggeration. In 1982, a historian contacts Weber. She is writing a book about the siege of Tobruk, specifically about Australian night fighting tactics. She asks if Weber will be interviewed. Weber agrees. They meet in a cafe in Munich, and Weber talks for 3 hours. He describes specific raids, specific casualties, specific moments when German soldiers realized the Australians were not following expected patterns. He pulls out old journals, preserved documents, letters he copied from staff officers decades ago. The historian takes notes carefully. Why do you think the Australian contribution is so overlooked? She asks. Weber considers this. After the war, everyone wanted simple stories. Germany lost because of tactical errors and material disadvantage. Britain won because of courage and American support. These stories are comfortable, but the Australian story is uncomfortable. It suggests that colonial soldiers, men who Europe dismisses inferiors, fought with effectiveness that exceeded European standards. No one wants to acknowledge that. Not British command, who want credit for victory. Not American audiences, who want their forces to be decisive. Certainly not Germans, who cannot admit that our most fearful opponents in North Africa were men from the other side of the world we never took seriously. The historian's book is published in 1984. It is well-researched, compelling, exhaustively documented. It sells modestly, receives good reviews in academic journals, disappears from public consciousness within a year. The films keep focusing on Montgomery and Rommel. The documentaries keep emphasizing American material support and British resilience. The Australian 9th Division remains a historical footnote. In 1991, Weber travels to Australia. His daughter married an Australian businessman, moved to Sydney, had children. Weber visits them, meets his grandchildren, tours the city. One afternoon, his son-in-law takes him to the Australian War Memorial in Canberra. They walk through exhibits about World War II, North Africa, Tobruk. The displays include photographs, equipment, personal testimonies from Australian soldiers. One display quotes a German officer's assessment from August 1941. The Australians are not normal soldiers. They approach battle with aggression that borders on recklessness, yet their tactics are sophisticated and their discipline under fire is excellent. They are the most dangerous opponents we have faced in this theater. Weber reads this and feels something release in his chest. Not vindication exactly, more like relief. Someone remembered. Someone preserved the truth. His son-in-law notices Weber staring at the display. "Did you fight in North Africa?" he asks. "Tobruk," Weber says quietly. "I was at Tobruk." The son-in-law's expression shifts. "Against the rats of Tobruk?" Weber nods. The rats of Tobruk, the nickname Australian soldiers gave themselves, embracing the German propaganda term meant to insult them, turning it into badge of pride. "They were the best soldiers I encountered in the entire war," Weber says. "I fought in Poland, France, North Africa, Italy. The Australians at Tobruk were the best." His son-in-law does not know what to say to this. Weber does not expect him to. How do you respond when your wife's German father-in-law, a Wehrmacht veteran, tells you Australian soldiers terrified him more than anything else he experienced in 6 years of war? They move through the rest of the museum in silence. Weber dies in 1998, at home, surrounded by family. Among his possessions, his daughter finds journals from North Africa, carefully preserved for 5 decades. She considers donating them to a museum, decides against it. Too personal, too painful, too complicated. The journals remain in a box in her attic in Sydney. The siege of Tobruk lasted 241 days. German forces launched multiple assaults, sustained thousands of casualties, achieved nothing. The fortress held. The rats of Tobruk held. Between April and November 1941, Australian forces launched 150 documented night raids against German positions surrounding Tobruk. These raids inflicted disproportionate casualties, degraded German morale, prevented consolidation of siege positions, and ultimately made the siege unsustainable. At El Alamein in October 1942, the Australian 9th Division broke through German defensive lines in the northern sector, forcing Rommel's retreat and changing the momentum of the entire North African campaign. German intelligence assessments, staff officer reports, and private correspondence from Rommel himself consistently identify Australian forces as exceptional opponents, more aggressive than British forces, more tactically sophisticated than American forces in their initial engagements, more psychologically resilient than any Allied army in the theater. These are historical facts, preserved in documents, verified by multiple sources, undeniable to anyone who examines the evidence. Yet the popular narrative of World War II in North Africa focuses elsewhere. Montgomery's brilliance, Rommel's legend, American industrial might, British determination, all important, all true, all incomplete. The Australians who fought at Tobruk and El Alamein were not mythical warriors. They were ordinary men, clerks and farmers and tradesmen from Perth and Sydney and Brisbane and Melbourne. They volunteered for service, traveled 12,000 miles to fight in someone else's desert, and approached war with practical aggression that contradicted every assumption about colonial troops. They did not fight because of superior equipment. They had less than their opponents. They did not fight because of numerical advantage. They were consistently outnumbered. They did not fight because of sophisticated training. Many were recent civilians when they arrived in theater. They fought because they decided to fight, because retreat was not acceptable, because letting Germans consolidate positions meant letting Germans win, and winning was not something to be passively prevented but actively denied. This is not a comfortable story for anyone. It suggests that military effectiveness comes from factors more complex than technology or numbers or doctrine. It suggests that men dismissive peripheral to empire became central to empire survival. It suggests that assumptions about who matters in war, and who tells a story afterward, are always worth questioning. In museums across Australia, veterans of Tobruk and El Alamein are remembered. Their photographs line walls. Their stories are preserved. School children learn their names. In Germany, veterans who fought at Tobruk remember them too, with fear, with respect, with the understanding that comes from facing an opponent who refused every expectation and rewrote every assumption about how war works when one side decides not to lose. The rest of the world mostly forgot, or never knew, or chose narratives that fit more comfortably into existing beliefs about who wins wars and why. But the evidence remains, preserved in documents that cannot be dismissed, testimonies that cannot be ignored, fact that exists whether acknowledged or not. The Australians at Tobruk were not supposed to matter. They mattered more than almost anyone else. That is a truth German veterans carried for 50 years, unable to convince anyone who was not there, unable to make the story fit the history being written around them. Sometimes the most important truths are the ones most easily overlooked, not because they are false, but because they are inconvenient.